Yeah.
Harrison. Hi, Harris.
Okay.
Maybe we should say, what forest are you closest to or actually zooming in from? That would be a fun map to map the forest. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you, everybody, for joining us for the last of our Forest Future Salon for this season. It's not the last forever. This has been a fun run. One of the highlights during a global pandemic is to take our minds off of all the serious business of our health concerns and our social unrest and focus on the challenges of our forest. Sorry, I'm not trying to be goofy here. I am actually telling you that this has been a highlight and that these salons have kept a network thriving and alive and conversations moving forward and solutions being brought to the table. And I hope that those of you who have been coming to these have found the content engaging and thoughtful. I'm really appreciative of all the speakers that have given us their time, and for those of you who've kind of really brought the good questions. And so we'll take a pause for the summer months and go enjoy our forests and do some outdoor activities and check in on some of the wood piles that we're keeping track of, and find other ways to deliver content. And then we'll pick it back up in the fall, and we might keep it as virtual, or we might have some, maybe it'll be time to bring everybody back together. So bear with us as we put our plan in place. And if you have opinions about that, Benji, calling in from New York, tell us that, what your preference is, and we'll pick it back up in the fall. But with that, I just want to acknowledge, before I get into the boring part of this presentation, not the speakers and Teal, but I just want to say, we want more of these kinds of conversations. And so however we can serve you in the education that you seek around what's happening in the forest, let us know. But we're also very interested in action. And so we want to hear from you over the summer and reflect on this experience with us. And we couldn't have done this without Teal curating this last season of salons for us, and using her leverage and her network to bring many of you as speakers to this series. So Teal, I just want to thank you for everything that you've done. You've really brought the conversation to a different level, and we're all the better for it. And then I also want to thank Caroline and Tamia behind the scenes at TTCF for just being constantly available and making us look good and communicating and making sure we're all showing up to the same place at the same time. And then I just want to acknowledge Robert as well for all the work that he's done in helping shape this program of our forest futures. So we're not going away forever, but we are going to take a pause over the summer months. And with that, let's dig into today's topic. So all right, I will blow through these really fast because most of you have already seen me and heard me do this, but our mission is to connect people and opportunities to generate resources to build a more caring, creative, and effective community of the North Lake Tahoe Truckee region. And we have an illustrious board of badasses as well as staff, of which we have some of our board members and staff members here. Our 2020 was pretty amazing in that we had the opportunity and honor of helping our community respond to our emergency during the pandemic. And so we were able to steward a lot of generosity into the right places to ensure that not only our nonprofits, but the community that they serve remain steady and stable through these tough times, as well as deliver more than $1 million of community scholarships to the youth in our community. And we just are going through our scholarship season again right now, and handing them out to the kids. And it's a reminder of how important our future environmentalists and civic leaders are. And then finally, just stewarding our donor advised funds that helped us get out over $5 million last year, which is pretty fun. Next slide. And so just to give you more context of the Community Foundation, we aren't just about the forest. We do the scholarships, we make grants, we respond to community needs and crises. We have initiatives like our Family Strengthening, where we have the Community Collaborative, or Accelerating Housing Solutions through the Mountain Housing Council. And you have landed in the Salon specific to helping us address the issues that we see in our forest, which are issues that go way beyond just the Tahoe forest. So that's why this is a really important, expansive opportunity to connect the dots across the forests in California and beyond. Next slide. Over the years, we've given many grants to many important nonprofits within our region doing amazing work, and we intend to do more of it. Next slide. And throughout this series, we've really tried to tap the right partners to help educate us in this work, and again, connect and build relationships that can leverage each other and align resources. Next slide. And I don't have to remind you that we are sitting in a very privileged spot in the sense that we aren't talking about the fire we had. We're trying to prevent the fire of the future. And so these statistics feel very real to us in our community. And we recognize that many of the communities in California don't get to really talk about how to prevent the fire that already happened. Next slide. So, on the heels of last fire season and looking at the current drought, there is a sense of urgency among all of us on what we can do to really kind of secure our future in this world in which climate action and community grassroots solutions are going to be of the utmost importance to get past these fire seasons and get in front of prevention of it. So next slide. So our role has continued to be a convener and educator of key stakeholders as well as our community through different mediums. We mobilize resources through grants. We are looking at all sorts of different financial structures to make a big difference and leverage some of the state and federal funding coming our way. And we continue to have a vision for a forest venture lab or forest futures lab that will really accelerate the market-based solutions that are presenting themselves to us in a very real way right now. So with that, thank you for indulging me and giving you some context. I would like to introduce Teal Zimring, who has been our consultant and acting as an interim program manager for our Forest Futures work. Yes, Benji, I am looking forward to sharing more with you. That is part of our summer work. And so I want to hand it over to Teal, and she will introduce this amazing group of presenters that we have today. Thank you, Teal.
Thank you, Stacy. It is always such a privilege and a joy to be here with all of you. The briefest of housekeeping. We have great questions for the great speakers we have here today, but we also hope that your questions will come out of your mouths with your voices. So please go ahead and drop them in the chat. Feel free to engage very actively with the chat. Drop links, questions, ideas, reactions. I'll be tracking and I will call on you to interject and participate in the conversation. So having said that, why are we here today? Restoration economies, we threw the 101 in there. And I'm excited today to have a conversation that helps us define what restoration economy is, the economic activity associated with the restoration of land and the ongoing regenerative use of land, and what that means for us here in Tahoe. And 3 speakers today are looking at that from different vantage points with different critical decisions to make. And I will allow them to elaborate on that very question. Brittany, the Policy and Outreach Manager for the Sierra Nevada Conservancy. Thanks for being here, Brittany. Dan, Senior Climate Advisor to the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, also leading the new Climate Catalyst Fund. Excited to learn more there. And Kristen, whom we know and love, the Vice President of Sierra Business Council, as well as a board member of the Tahoe Truckee Community Foundation. So to start, and by way of opening salvo for each of you, it would be great to hear how you define restoration economies and how you look at providing solutions and uplifting solutions through your organizations and your work. And why don't we start with our policy person? Let's start with Brittany.
Thank you, Teal. Thank you, everyone. I'm happy to be here today. Sierra Nevada Conservancy, we're a state agency and we're under the California Natural Resources Agency. And so when we think about restoration economies, we are thinking about the landscape, we're thinking about our communities in the Sierra Nevada region that we represent, and we're also thinking about the economies that we're trying to help support. So for us, we're thinking we want to implement ecologically sound forest restoration. We want to build organizational capacity to be able to support that restoration work long term, where we're thinking about how do we build the workforce that's needed to help sustain that work, that restoration work. And then we're also thinking about how do we support the infrastructure that's needed to build that out. So for us, we're thinking holistically environmental, economic, and social development, but with a real foundation on kind of that forest health and wildfire risk reduction focus.
Had trouble with my mute there. Dan, let's go over to you.
Thank you, Teal. Thank you, Stacy. And thanks all for the chance to be with you here today. I guess the initial perspective that I would bring sitting at the Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development and this new program at the Infrastructure Bank is on the economic side of the restoration or restorative economics. What we're driving for is a chance to create new economic incentives, really shape market conditions so that these industries have a chance to flourish, develop their own momentum, drive economic growth, shared prosperity, and deliver climate wealth really in parts of the state and parts of the kind of the global economy that haven't benefited from traditional market forces. So it's a somewhat of a green ice age undertaking. You know, we are talking about making investments of public money, very much interested in using those public dollars to leverage in more private money. So it is a microeconomic exercise at the end of the day, but it's not as sterile as that because the broader context that we're operating in is restoration of both natural systems at the local level. We know that our market economy has contributed to climate change, kind of the macro environmental challenge, but it's also driven waste and destruction all the way down to the community level, and we need to be in a position to heal that, help heal that with public investments. In the course of doing that, we hope to give communities a chance to self-direct where these investments go and engage in their own sort of restorative and healing process. And then it's all in the context of the abiding mission for me and for the folks I work with, which is the climate crisis, and having an outside shot, I would say, to put it bluntly, an outside shot at solving this problem in the next decade so that we can let nature heal itself and, by extension, help us all heal and be restored.
Great. I'll do a yes to what Brittany and Dan both said. And I come back to the root of the word and what restoration means to me. It's really about being restorative and hopefully regenerative. And I invite anybody to use that word instead of restoration, meaning that the economy is not extractive at all and leaves forests and communities in better shape with sustainable models that ensure more prosperous communities, as Dan just said, well-paying jobs, and the ultimate goal of improving the ecosystem. Certainly what we're talking about today with forests, there is an extractive quality, but it is not your grandfather's extraction where you just leave a mess behind and then all these externalities are paid for by the community or by taxpayers. And it's really about building both the systems and the infrastructure that help regulate our climate, protect the forests, and then manage our water. And building systems that really mimic nature, using meadows and streams to filter stored water, repurposing wood from our forests into marketable products. That's what I think of with the restoration economy, or regenerative economy.
Thank you each. And from here on out, if possible, just go ahead and Dan, Kristen, and Brittany, take yourselves off mute. And I encourage you to jump in if and when you would like as we go forward. Each of you mentioned something about a holistic approach. The social, political, environmental, Brittany, I believe were your words. Dan talking about actually restoring an entire ecosystem so that it can continue to be restored over time. And then Kristen thinking about a whole regenerative ecosystem. That's obviously an incredibly challenging thing to do. You're managing AI. I just got a note that my voice was not coming through very clearly. You are managing objectives across such diverse goals, environmental and economic outcomes, uplifting a whole region. I'd love to talk a little bit about the challenges you have in that. You've now defined for us restoration economies. What are the really challenging pieces of that puzzle for you in your work?
I'll jump in. To me, the real challenge is reallocation of capital and democratization of capital with less bureaucracy and more results. So investments that look at the multiplier effect of investing in a forest economy, we talk about it ad nauseum. We talk about it. And we can actually calculate the co-benefits, if you will. But we're sort of like just dipping our toe into the investments. There's some of it. But restoration activities, at the end of the day, they are great job creators, particularly in rural communities. And these projects and investments, they stimulate demand for local products and services like heavy equipment operators, rock and gravel, transportation, plant nurseries. They really can build up a local economy. I was in Sierra County this past weekend, which is where one of our favorite projects is burgeoning. And the economy is now dependent apparently on mountain biking only. But there are only 3 gas stations that I can think of in the entire county. So if you're stuck in Downeyville, you either have to like glide down, and I mean, it's crazy. It's like we don't think of this, but if you have the population and the activity and the demand, think of what you could create in a county like that.
Happy to jump in on the practicalities of what we're thinking about with the Catalyst Fund. Just briefly, I should say that we're in the conversation right now with the legislature. It's not a done deal. The creation of this investment vehicle, this public fund, is part of the governor's overall proposed $1 billion of wildfire strategy and associated grant making. We'll see where it goes. But the goal of sort of our version of an integrated approach is the investment capital with a public purpose that can take risks and pursue industries and advanced technologies that the private markets won't do right now, that stimulates the supply of a good or service. We think a lot about advanced energy products. I think that's going to be tightly aligned with our climate goals. And I say advanced because we really want to be pushing the ambition there. Advanced construction materials, maybe even ideally coupling with our need to build a lot of affordable housing in the very near term as a state. So the capital can stimulate supply and can have these really beneficial local economic effects. But we also have to think about the demand side and what can we do as a policy community and as leaders in our communities broadly to make sure that that circuit is closed. You're creating something fascinating and useful societally and economically. Who wants to buy it? And what are the policy levers we can pull as a state to make sure that there's an organized and rapidly growing market that wants to take that stuff out of the forest and turn it into the products that we need for a climate resilient and beneficial future. So we have to pull the demand levers too with public policy. And we have to make sure that the industries are maturing, the workforce is ready. There's a bunch of public intervention all the way down at the sector level. And then lastly, we have to make sure that the government signals are clear. You've got a multitude of state agencies working generally in the right direction, often getting in each other's way, making life harder for folks on the ground who are trying to do projects. So a lot of it is behind the scenes, just clearing the underbrush of government bureaucracy. And that's state to state, that's state to local, and increasingly up to the federal level where we have new partnerships. So it's not pretty at all, but it is the key, I think, for putting up a good public partnership to what we know will be largely driven by communities and private actors at the end of the day.
I'll maybe add one more piece to that, and that's kind of ensuring that we've got the local capacity in the region to help move these projects along. I mean, we are looking at a big flood of funding coming into the Sierra Nevada region, and that means we need a lot of partners in the region to be able to plan those projects, develop those project proposals, even just learn how to manage the grants that they can to, move these prescribed fire and thinning projects along. I think that's one of the places that we've seen a lot of change just over the last year. The state is kind of really focused in on investing in organizational capacity. And I think that that's helping position us so that as these other opportunities come up, as these other funding options come up, I think that positions our local folks to be ready to be able to move and ensure that we've got projects going on the ground, ensure that we've got the workforce ready, and just be able to keep kind of the regional health, both human and environmental, kind of whole.
That's a good pivot to, or I guess, opening, Kristen. I think for a lot of the work that you do is thinking about local capacity to receive what Dan just spoke about and what Brittany just spoke about. I'd love to hear your thoughts on local capacity.
Well, I have a lot of them right now, especially since most of our clients can't even find employees. So this is a bad time to talk about local capacity in any industry. Mm-hmm. But the fact of the matter, I think we're in an anomaly. We just went through this black swan event, and that's trickling out. But there are still many communities that have very high unemployment rates, particularly in rural areas, that they're not looking for any kind of tech job. They're looking for more of a community-based job. And we also have to remember that a lot of the projects, and I'll cite some examples later, but that we're talking about, there is sort of a white-collar element to it in terms of engineers and people that run the business, but there's also more of a blue-collar, but also engineers, but the kind that can fix anything. So we're talking about a huge value chain of jobs here that could be available with this economy.
Yeah, I think Dan, you used the words organized and rapidly growing market, and then at the same time, communities a chance to direct where they want to go. And the idea of balancing those two things is incredibly complex. Highly regional opportunities to push forward regenerative economic and ecological outcomes, but then also this idea of rapidly growing and organized such that we can do that at scale. Kristen, you just mentioned examples, but I think that's where I'm going with this is how do we do that at scale? How do we, do something highly regional and local, but then learn from that to do that in a much broader way? Dan and Brittany, where you sit. Not sure I aimed that at anyone in particular, but I see this look.
I'll add in. I'm trying not to be the loudmouth in the class today, but your point that was buried in your comment is that we can't do it all at once. We just saw what happens when we try to do something all at once, and during the pandemic, and it can end in confusion, frustration, and failure. Pilots are what's needed. There are a number of people on this call who have pilot projects either ready to go and looking for funding, or they're in design, or they've thought about them, or they've had some seed funding, and and they've been committed to these things for years. So I think it's, first of all, getting those over the finish line and seeing where we are and be willing to pivot. I yield my time to.
Go ahead.
I'll maybe just talk a little bit about, go ahead, Dan.
No, you.
I'll talk about something that's kind of geographically very, very close to you in Truckee, and that's the Tahoe Central Sierra Initiative and the work that Sierra Nevada Conservancy has been doing with partners, the Nature Conservancy and the National Forests there. But this partnership is really designed to look at the landscape in a bigger way than I think a lot of the other collaboratives that we work with are looking. And so we're definitely learning some things there about what works at that landscape scale and what doesn't. It's a 2.4 million acre landscape and includes basically the Tahoe Basin, and then between the Highway 50 and Highway 49 corridors. And looking at how do we plan restoration work across that 2.4 million acre landscape so that you can support investment in infrastructure, so that you can support kind of a shared workforce there. That's something that I think is one of those steps. To Kristen's point, we can't do it all at once. So we're taking a few steps there to kind of think a little bit differently about how we plan for all of that work.
Yeah, and Teal, I think you hit on a tension here, and I don't want to overplay the notion that there's some sort of perfect end market that we can envision, and that if we just send one demand signal, everything organizes from there, because they're so much dependent upon the local community's desires and the nature of the projects that they want to participate in, because those are the folks that are going to go and get it done. And I'm not telling anybody on this call anything they don't know. But the difference between a pilot project and one that has durable kind of economic momentum, such to sustain the community's engagement and jobs over time outside of whatever financing went into that pilot, which is often grant money, and something that can scale and grow and have its own momentum, is pretty significant. That I've seen a lot of things that hit their marks on pilots but never went any farther. There's a death by pilot is a real thing. So I do think it's a tension we have to wait. And I think about what the state has done through programs like BioRAM, Biomat, et cetera. These are, pretty blunt instruments, but clear signals that, regardless of the underlying economics and bureaucratic challenges, produce this thing and we will pay you a fixed price for it. That becomes a very financeable transaction. Unfortunately, you wind up with, in some of the views of some, a product that the state's transitioning away from, direct combustion for bioelectricity. But what are the analogs we can learn from that? Send signals for the next generation of technologies and products that we want, but still empower communities and capitalize communities and do workforce development at the community scale so that they can access that market if that's the choice they want to make.
Thank you, Dan. It's so, Kristen, you said this, and then Dan, you reflected it as well, but everyone always seems to be shooting for the game changer. And then in reality, what I think I'm hearing reflected is every problem is a sum of its component parts, and each of those component parts has its own solutions, its own small teams, its own process that it's going through. So to get to big ideas and to replicating regional projects like the 2.4 million throughout the state, to replicating things like you've begun to describe, Kristen, and what you pointed out, Dan, microeconomics to macroeconomics, it's really small problems and people actually rolling up their sleeves and doing work and just giving it a shot under the guise of aiming for something bigger than just a pilot, but really, focusing on getting specific work done at the regional scale, small solutions. And Kristen, you and I were talking about this earlier, but there is an example that I would love for you to share that to me is just a really useful example of what it can look like to look beyond a pilot at a regional scale that I know you've been supporting.
Yeah, regional scale for this particular application works because trees are huge and heavy and expensive to move, right? We have plenty of them, and we have areas where they can be stored, which for a lot of industries, that is a choke point because we're not in this sort of lean manufacturing environment where you need just-in-time inventory, right? You can clear in a season, store, and then utilize. So, and it does always, one of the things that always breaks my heart is that trees are worth dead than alive. But in this case, we're talking about, the case that I'm talking about is really fire and community safety, something that has to be done. And I believe you're talking about the North Star Community Services Project. So I love this project, and I don't know if Mike's on the call, but he is a true visionary in that, he's one of those get it done guys. Like I'm I love that because I'm an implementer. So you can have all the policy in the world, but then you can have somebody who comes along and can hack that policy or that code and go, I've got a solution that I can do, and I can start small and I can expand and expand. And that is looking at, Dan just mentioned the state's moving away from bioenergy for electricity. Unfortunately, we're spending a lot of time on that, but using micro biomass plants for heat is something entirely different. And in certain communities, like the Sierra, it makes complete sense. If you have to clear material out of an area for safety, for example, heating large institutional buildings is extremely expensive in the Sierra. So Mike has really taken on this challenge and created a plan for literally the thousands of tons of bone dry tons that he has to handle every year. And having sort of having the tenacity to keep on that project and look for partners through the Forest Service, et cetera, and financing is really impressive. He is a boots on the ground guy who's trying to solve his problem, but also create community benefit. And I don't want to give too much of it away but it's fascinating. And, we need those leaders. We have other examples. Some of them are on the call. I can see their names too, of different types of projects. And I really admire how they're sticking with it, because it's not an easy road at all.
Thanks, Kristen. I used this adage earlier, but history is written by the people who showed up to the meetings. Mm-hmm. And to throw in another metaphor, a lot of us are walking around, cooks in the kitchen and commenting on the recipes. And at the end of the day, we need somebody actually serving up some dishes, however small, for us to be able to learn and aggregate and grow from there. So that's part of what I find so compelling about their work as well. Thank you. And Dan, I'd love to ask you a little more about your goals with the Climate Catalyst Fund as it relates to uplifting local solutions, and how you think you might be able to take that funding structure and what you described as I'm going to misremember your words, but the overall objective around the climate crisis, and really aim that at local restoration economies. Yeah. If you could expand there.
Sure, and I should say, and I should have said at the beginning, the Infrastructure Bank and the Catalyst Fund is kind of exists to help the state achieve its policy goals. It's not a policy setting organization. It's a kind of get it done financing shop. And GoBiz, Governor's Office of Business and Economic Development, which sits above iBank, is a sort of facilitation function that's staffed with people who answer the phone when someone's got a project that they're stuck on, or someone's looking for resources within the state. It's like that hotline. So we're trying to bring that mindset, that mentality and skills to the climate crisis and to individual sort of sector or geographic specific solutions to the climate crisis. So we take our cues from the Resources Agency and CAL FIRE and others about what they're hearing from folks on the ground and what the communities are saying they need. We're going to develop, hopefully, if we have the opportunity to be capitalized, those relationships ourselves. But when we talk to our colleagues at the agencies, they're really interested in us finding a way to just get capital in the hands of folks on the front lines who need a masticator or some other piece of physical equipment so they can get out and kind of get the project going. And so we're actively trying to figure out what it looks like to capitalize that. A loan guarantee that's backstopped by the state, but provided by a community bank that knows the folks and they want to get that relationship deepened. That's a great way for us to move money quickly, take a lot of the risk off the table, not all of it, because we need the frontline eyes on the projects or on the investments, and provide those new pieces of physical equipment so that the communities can go and do what needs to be done on the clearing side. Then as we start thinking about the use of the material, there's the capitalization of an advanced energy project or an electricity production without a smokestack. We can do that. It's expensive. Part of driving down the cost of that and making that the new normal for the state is getting scale behind it and lowering the cost of capital to do so, and bringing in technology partnerships from all around the world that we have access to. And then at the end of the day, when things are, we kind of have the headline level of what the state's trying to accomplish, and that feels good. But the people on the ground that are actually doing the work are struggling, and it all looks like is a wall of bureaucracy building up the state's capacity to actually be a partner and cut through some of that red tape. Red tape to green carpet is sort of a internal phrase that we try and use. It's good rhetoric. We need to put some substance behind it. But at the end of the day, this is about getting money into the hands of people that can build projects that advance our collective goals without saying too dispositively, it has to look exactly like this. You know, I'm not going to sit here in Sacramento or Oakland and tell people down to the 10th decimal place what it needs to look like. We share the goal, we provide the capital, and we kind of trust the local partners as much as we can.
I saw Stacy wrote this in the chat, but music to our ears. I think it probably reflects a lot of people's perspectives hearing that approach. Any comments in response to that from Kristen and Brittany? And then I have one more question for you, and then we will open it up for all of your questions.
Well, my comment, you know, I feel like I'm insider trading here. I'm smiling as big as Stacy right now on Dan's answer, because that's been a vision of the Community Foundation for a long time, right? Helping get that capital to reduce the risks. I mean, we know those people who all they need is, you know, they need the masticator, they need the chipper, they need the, equipment. And these are not massive investments, but you also need that mechanism on the ground. You know, banks they want to see $1 million deals. They don't want to see small deals. So you need that sort of local representative who can vouch for the business plan, vouch for the entrepreneur, and say, yes, this is what this community needs. And I know it's not your $1 million investment, but it's going to make $1 million difference.
Agreed. I think we're excited to see kind of where this goes. I think it's a huge need across the region. So,
well, that all sounds quite collaborative. Let's hope those things come to fruition the way we hope they will with the three of you at the helm. I think we're probably in pretty good hands. I have one more question for each of you. And then there are 3 or 4 questions I've already received. The question I'd love to ask each of you is, if you could wave a magic wand and do one thing that would unlock the opportunities that you hope for in restoration economies, what might that one thing be? And this is a magic wand, so you're allowed to, you know, roll out green carpets on top of public agencies.
I have an answer for that.
Love it. Right off the bat.
Yes. Okay, so magic wand, most immediate term magic wand is that this kind of paradigm shift in how we're thinking about funding this work happens. There's so much changing right now, and so much just opportunity, I think, that's coming with this potential, with the early action budget that already passed in April, and then with the budget coming up, discussions that are happening now. There's a role that the state can play, and I think that we see real opportunity in kind of this different way of thinking about how we fund this work. Because prior to now, from the state perspective, a lot of it has been bond funded, and that is really hard to plan around. That's really hard to be long-term and sustainably thinking and kind of steady with. And so just, even though this is one-time funding, just the opportunity to think differently about how we fund this work is super exciting. So that's my magic wand, is to keep that conveyor belt moving as it's moving right now, hopefully.
I'll go give Kristen the last word. This is kind of, might seem a little mundane, although folks who have been in the business, probably not mundane, feels maybe right on point for you all. But when I talk to the credit people, the loan people, the serious green eye shade people who, the Californians, they're motivated by climate, they get it, they want to see restorative work in the communities, but they're still making a loan, and they still want to know what's on the other side of that loan. And there's this emerging, it seems emerging to me, maybe it's always been present, it's at the rhetorical level, this notion of something like a joint powers authority, where governmental actors could bind themselves together in a really meaningful way and use their shared financial resources to backstop the local economic activity that needs to happen. The individuals, the private businesses that don't have a balance sheet, and therefore that's kind of the conundrum. Like, how do we get money into the hands of people that don't look like a traditional bank customer, but are the ones who are going to do the job? And the JPA is a model that could conceivably do that. And it's fiendishly difficult to structure it legally and keep everybody kind of bound together financially so that it becomes an underwritable proposition. And I know that sounds wonky and tedious, but it is the key that I think is missing right now. A true financial backstop for the counterparties. We can do this at scale. We can piece it together one-off. But if we want to have this thing really, really jump on a statewide basis, we need something that has that financial heft, probably backstopped by municipal governments in some fashion.
Again, yes, and Brittany, I agree with you. The bond funding, it's not sustainable, and it can be really onerous reporting especially for a small operator. But I said this right in the beginning about the reallocation of capital. We have this ingrained mindset with the expectation of double-digit returns and low taxes forever. And no one likes to pay high taxes, and everyone likes double-digit returns on their money. But so the argument to invest in forest restoration projects that picks up slack where public funds might not be available and returns are typically less and require more patience than most investors have a stomach for, it can be tough. So the question is, how do we incentivize and prioritize investments in ecosystem services and regenerative economy? And then this is to Sachet's question, how do we provide the technical assistance needed to help business succeed? And we have some of those mechanisms in place in California. We have small business development centers. We have opportunity funds. We have California Capital. We have these. They're not state-run. They're nonprofit lenders, but they can be a little more flexible on the underwriting. So I think taking kind of Dan's idea about the JPA and then combining these more flexible lending mechanisms can really help get that capital out.
Thank you. It's I think encouraging to hear those ideas, those magic wands build on one another. Let's think about funding differently. Let's provide true financial backstops, and let's seek opportunities to invest in co-benefits or ecosystem services. It's, to me, encouraging to hear the shared rhetoric around where the magic wand would be, because that suggests there'll be a shared focus on making that happen. I would love to open this up. I'm just opening up the chat here. I know Sachet's question we touched on a little bit, but if there are others who have questions, please, first of all, feel free to unmute yourself. It's a small group. We know many of one another. You're welcome to just speak. Otherwise, I will call on you from the chat as I look. Sachet, it looks like you have additional questions. It'd be great to just have you ask those if you'd be up for that.
Yeah, sorry, I don't mean to be blowing up the chat room, but no, thanks for having me. And I think particularly this question was directed more so to Dan, and I think recognizing its applicability not simply to your fund, but to anybody that's doing this work. Background, I work in financial services, so I think also wholeheartly understand, like on the return side, but also thinking, what are those other kind of powerful agents around being able to tell the story of, attracting that fund for the additional social impacts that we talked about at the head of the call. And I think also recognizing some of the challenges and opportunities around standardization of what social outcomes look like. So I was hoping you could speak to your experience in that a bit.
Meaning, how do we propose to kind of approach the loan process, taking it values?
As you think about pitching or attracting and retaining investors, one, being able to tell the purely financial side of what an investment looks like, yep. But two, to be able to pair it with the outcomes that are going to be achieved at the community level, whether that's the restoration benefit, the job creation, the needed goods and services that aren't at the community. Before thinking similarly to kind of what the community development, like financial institution does, was curious what that looks like in your world.
Yeah, I mean, we definitely have a CDFI philosophy underlying a lot of what we're doing. Our new chief credit officer just came from CDFI, so that's definitely kind of a core value. And on the returns side, very much recognizing that our cost of capital, if it comes through the state budget, is effectively zero. And so we want to be lending close to that just cover our expenses and any expected loss, and use that extra financial juice, frankly, to make the returns better for the private investor that we need to also entice to come to the table. We're looking to drive $3, $4, $5 of private money for every dollar of public we put in. And one way we can do that is doing the upfront work to organize the transaction and, in the public interest, take a lower return, get our money back, and then, if that's enough to entice others to the table, we think it will be. That's a big part of the driver. And it's also the case that, we're all seeing the rise of the ESG investor, a lot of sort of smoke there, but some real stuff. They have their own metrics. They want to see social outcomes. So they're looking for deals that hit their targets if the whole thing comes together. And so we can elevate some investment opportunities and say, look, you're rurally focused, you're environmentally focused. We've got a suite of projects that we've substantially de-risked, and we're providing enhanced returns to you. If that's not what you're looking for, I don't know what is.
Thanks. Well, Benji, we'll go to you, and then Mike Stoudemeyer right after that.
Yeah, thanks everyone for the conversation, and Teal for moderating. I had a question about this death by a pilot that Dan was talking about, and how to cross that chasm. And then also this reflection from Brittany around different types of funding that are needed. And I guess to Teal's question, the context and kind of background from my side, I'm working with a nonprofit that's trying to figure out how to support forest restoration, and particularly through funding, and trying to figure out where that funding is most needed in California has been a big question mark. As one example, Teal and Stacy connected us with Ellie and the Forest Service team, and Van Norden is one of the projects, the high elevation meadow restoration projects that we've been talking about. And there seems to be some challenges there in getting funding because it doesn't fit squarely within some of the existing protocols for funding like CCI. And so I'm not sure if that's exactly a great example of a pilot or an innovation in terms of restoration, but it does strike me as something that, the research is still new, the science is still new, and there might not necessarily be as much policy or government support for that type of project. And so I'm kind of curious, maybe using that as an example, but not necessarily, both kind of how to cross that chasm and avoid, death by pilot, and what kind of funding, where the funding is needed, and what kind.
I'll go, but really quickly, since I introduced that term, and it's a little bit cynical, and I don't mean it to come across that way. I've seen a couple of different versions of death by pilots, but one is when an incumbent industry is being forced to adopt a new technology and really doesn't want to. So they'll put it in the pilot realm and just sort of stiff arm it forever, and because they're happy with their traditional industrial polluting process. May or may not be applicable here. But the second one that I think is more material, and one we hope to provide help around, is if the pilot is aiming at performance metrics or financial metrics that are not consistent with what the next stage of capital is going to be looking for when it goes from pilot to scale, then it's a missed opportunity. I would suggest you want to make sure you're designing the performance outcomes and the measurement of those to be synced up with what later stage capital is looking for. It's not easy because you don't necessarily know where that later stage capital is coming from, but the state and the iBank and other financial players with a public interest might give you that insight that they, in addition to these other technical things you're proving, keep an eye on these other performance characteristics that would be material from a financing perspective later on.
Thank you.
And she's a good question. And I think we're, for the Sierra Nevada Conservancy, as a state agency, we're often one funder in a whole mix of a variety of different funders in one particular project. So, and you're right, the meadow restoration doesn't fit nicely into CCI right now. I think that's something that we would like to see shift over time is, we've got these buckets of money, and bond funding is like this too, where, oftentimes the pot of money that's available to a particular state agency is specific to certain types of work. And yet when we think of a meadow restoration project, we're thinking of, you're doing the meadow restoration, but you may also be wanting to do the forest restoration around it. And you may also be wanting to do trail connectivity to something else. I mean, those are the kinds of projects I think that we would like to see happen more often. But right now that takes piecing together a whole bunch of different funding sources. So, I mean, I guess if this goes back to the magic wand question, one of the things that would be really cool is to see our state funding getting matched in a way that allows for those kinds of projects to be that more holistic project, even if we only have forest health funding or you only have the meadow restoration funding. Kind of that opportunity for a partnership on a larger project is something that would be, I mean, it's happening now, but if the funding that was out there was available, was a little bit more flexible, we could do more of that restoration work that's not just single focused. That also probably gets to some of the outcomes and how we tell the story. I think that's a place that we focus a lot of our time, is how do we tell these stories about these forest health projects, in the sense that it's not just wildfire risk reduction, it's also workforce development, it's also air quality improvement, it's also, habitat improvement. It's not just this one single focus. And so just that's definitely some place that we would like to be focusing on a little bit more, and broadening the available funding to be able to do more of that holistic work.
Thank you.
Mike.
Thanks, Teal. My question or kind of comment was similar regarding Dan's on the death by pilot. That's something that's actually been in the back of my mind for some time as we develop our initiative here for utilization. And namely because there's a lot of money out there right now for first goes. And so my thought process on that, at least on the project side of the utilization, is that, it helps to mitigate the risk of kind of going it first in a region. And so it's necessary from that standpoint, but by all means, if these things are to be effective at the scale and pace that we need, they need to be, sorry, my battery's dying. They need to be able to stand on their own legs. And my thought process there is that, actually it was reflected in a couple Salon series back. There was a gentleman on the call from one of the impact investment companies, I believe, that said, this isn't popular, but this is a shared liability, a shared effort to solve. It's not going to just come from the outside. It's just not going to come from the Forest Service. It needs to be something we all deal with. And that's something that, resonates with me, because I believe the same thing. It's like, if you're going to live in the desert, you're going to pay more for water, right? If you're going to live in the WUI, you're going to have to pay more for forest management. And so, we're in the process of launching a parcel tax, $200 a year, to do the actual, work on the ground to replace the grants that were circulating, in years past for that extraction work. But, on the utilization side, on this initiative for the biomass district heating system, low interest loans down the road could help seed that capital that's needed to get these projects off the ground. There needs to be something there. I don't think they need to be outright grants, because I think from the numbers that we've been seeing, we're hopeful to prove these out, that there is good economics behind them in terms of being able to return enough of a revenue to cover your cost and actually reinvest back in the forest management piece. And then, so just a couple thoughts on that, because I think that is a key element. We don't want to just, have a $5 million capital project with $4 million in grant funding look like the poster child of success, because that isn't going to be able to be replicated at the pace and scale we need. So it's a good conversation to have. Thanks.
You're getting some thumbs up. I don't know if you can see those. Any other, any response to that, Brittany, Kristen, and Dan?
Yeah, I mean, Mike's point is right on. At the end of the day, we're creating new business models, right? And they have to be sustainable financially. We can talk all day long about the regenerative or restoration economy and helping our forests and helping our communities, but it does take money. And these business models have to work. Do they have to have massive returns? No. They have to provide jobs. But they have to be successful. And that probably will take maybe some grant funding once we reach economies of scale in some ways. And maybe it's all investment funding, but it's a different type of investment. It needs to be patient and low interest. And I mean, I personally am a huge fan of low interest loans or zero interest loans because it builds in that accountability to a project as opposed to just grants.
Thank you. And we are right up against the hour. I asked you your magic wand question. So let's all remember the magic wands that we see on the horizon changes in funding. I love the financial backstop idea for regional communities and looking at ecosystem services. Thank you all so much. I'm going to immediately just pass it over to Stacy. It is such a pleasure to be here, and I appreciate all of your time.
Dan and Brittany and Kristen, thank you so much for sharing your afternoon with us. And Teal, great job as usual. It's a pleasure working with you. I just want to reflect back and then close us out here. I have been in community philanthropy for longer than I care to admit. And I have this belief that there are plenty of resources on this planet. We just haven't put them together the right way. And that might sound very Pollyannish, but I really believe that we're at a point in looking at the way financing comes together around impact that we are all putting our tools on the table. I think with the state funding, you've called it buckets. The way people refer to it, it's like this tsunami of, the Price is Right, moment where you're grabbing the money in the box. It worries me a little bit, and yet I know that we need these resources desperately on the ground in the communities throughout California. And I just would ask that we think about what is left behind after these dollars are spent, and what do we get to create that stays behind. And after these dollars are gone, the forest hopefully will be there and need to be tended to far beyond the years that we have this surplus. And so what mechanisms can we put in place that will serve us longer than just this moment in time? And so I am so grateful for bringing your best thinking and the service that each of you are doing for and on behalf of our communities and our state. And for those of you who I won't see for a few months, when we send that invite back out this August for probably a September start, I hope to see your faces again in one form or another. And for our speakers, now that you are on this Zoom with us, you're now part of us. And so you have to come to other meetings and forest salons. And actually, we're looking at another 2-day tour to host our statewide partners. And so stay tuned for that. Teal and I are working on that with our lockstep partners at Sierra Business Council. So lots of good things to come. In the meantime, just go out and enjoy the forest. And if you need an invitation to enjoy the forest, come visit us, because we're all going to be out there really appreciating all that it has to provide to our community and our region. So with that, have a wonderful summer, and you know where to find us. We're busy working here. So thank you.
Thanks,
have a great evening.
Thanks, Teal.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stacy.
Thank you.
Thanks, Harris.